Welcome everyone to this is day 4 of Wisdom of Birth Intensive, and we're welcoming Suzanne Arms to be with us today, and I'll introduce her in a second. Thank you for joining us all, whether you're here live or joining the replay. Just kind of want to reach energetically out to everyone and say thank you for being present and joining us in our collective with the intention of aligning with the wisdom and the clarity of Mother Birth, and allowing us to really deepen into listening and hearing her wisdom. I've lit my candle to last us to that we also lit in the opening ceremony, that we can light every day, just connecting us, just creating more kind of enthusiasm, feeding the fire spirit, feeding the determination that's going to be keeping the thread to last the whole intensive. And I'm just going to start with a few words of just a breathing meditation to kind of land us here after a weekend of doing other things perhaps, and a day depending where we are, and then I'll introduce Suzanne. So you can kind of drop into where you are. Feel your buttocks or whatever is pressing against the surface, your back, your thighs. Just feel how it is coming into contact and leaning into what it is touching, and how what it is touching is coming up to meet it. Deepening and slowing our breath. So we just become aware of how it's reaching every cell in our whole body, from the top of our head, down our back and our shoulders, our spine, our arms, fingers, and down to our feet, our toes, our legs, our pelvis, our abdomen, chest. Our air is reaching everywhere in our body. Just connecting with that air. And honoring that vital force, that space. Guiding us to feel present here and connected with our intensive, the wisdom of birth. Even taking the meditation a little deeper and feeling as our buttocks are touching the ground, there's also roots that are extending deeper and deeper into Mother Earth through all her layers, and just going as deep as she's going. Down, 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 just connecting us so deeply with the very grounding, very common, very deep core. Seeing how those roots are just rooting around that, in whichever way our mind is rooting them. And the same way how we are connecting right up to the cosmos, to the planets above, into the clouds, into the sky, and the sun rays, the stars. Just connecting our consciousness with the universal hug from above of Mother Earth. Supported between these two extremes, these two poles, these two mothers. And then just allowing our breath to settle in a bit more there. As we allow ourselves to just really feel into this peaceful between breath and in the breath space of being, acceptance, of presence. Appreciating that. And you're feeling really, just start wiggling your fingers, wiggling your toes. Feeling again your buttocks pressing against the surface. Breath going in and out of your body. Maybe flicker your eyelids. And when you're ready, just open up to our beautiful gathering we have here. Of shared intention. Let's flip this off. And I am so excited to welcome Suzanne Arms here today. I think Suzanne Arms is very memorable and very important figure in many people's lives, and especially women who are looking a bit beyond the curtain. And she wrote a book called Immaculate Deception. And this was a book I read when I was pregnant. And I know I'm not the only one who read her books when we were pregnant, like so many years ago. And there was nothing else really out there. And there were these like giants who they felt like giants to me because they were so eloquent and so knowledgeable and so deep and so precise. And it was like I'd gone through all the sacred stuff and I'd gone through the biology, and this part for me just kind of was a nail that hit it home around prenatal imprinting, prenatal psychology, the association for prenatal and postpartum psychology, all the P's, and
prenatal and pre and perinatal
psychology.
Yeah.
And all these amazing findings and people. So Suzanne, I do have, I'm going to read it because I want to do you justice. So this was part of the introduction. Yes. Yeah, so she's also worked tirelessly with birth advocates, author, fighter for change within our damaging maternity care systems. Suzanne has spread the message that the physical, emotional, and spiritual impact of birth matters. And Suzanne founded one of the first community birth centers in the US and has worked tirelessly to bring positive changes into hospitals. She has authored 7 books, is a speaker, photojournalist, filmmaker, and social activist. And there's so much more because of your vast experience in working in this field that I'm going to just let it roll onto you and invite you to share however you'd like to start and greet our beautiful group here of women from all over the world, really, who've come to hear from you. And we can share. Well, I think it's nice for you to see everyone like this. So we'll keep gallery view. So Suzanne, I'm so excited. This is, I can't believe I got in touch with you like this in the last few months. You've become almost like a mothering figure to me, and it's been such an honor. And I'm so happy that I can share that also with this group who can share more wisdom from you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Hi, everybody. It's a little after 7 in the morning in Colorado, and it's really cold, and I have a hard time in the winter. And, so I've been nervous for days about speaking to you because, and I think it's because there's so much to talk about, and yet so little of it is considered in the general societies in which we live. When I first, when I gave birth to my daughter, Molly, I was preoccupied with myself. And as I think pregnant women quite naturally are. And I remember, for example, I went through quite a depression at one point in the pregnancy for a couple weeks. And because I am prone to depressions. And I remember thinking that that somehow I could prevent her from knowing about it. I had no idea that she was getting everything, that she was experiencing all my emotions through the hormones of my body, through the umbilical cord, that they were flooding her body, that she was living in a sea of amniotic fluid that was full of my emotions of fear and anxiety and depression at that time. And this carried on even after birth. I thought that if I didn't talk about what I was feeling, that she wouldn't get it. I had no idea. There was nobody talking about how the mother and baby are one biological system, and how what happens to one happens to the other. So my journey was one of moving from thinking about myself, to thinking about my daughter, to thinking about us, to thinking about the family, and thinking about society. And I started out as an anti-war activist and an environmental, I guess, activist in those days before they even called it the environment thing. They didn't have words for pollution. They just called it smoke. I mean, this was the mid 1960s. A lot has changed since then. At any rate, it wasn't until the 1990s that the whole field of pre and perinatal psychology grew. And the roots of it go way back to ancient times and indigenous cultures that have long understood that the mother and baby are one system. But Western thinking was definitely not this. And a number of you come from cultures in the East, in India, for example, where it's well understood that the mother and baby are one unit, and how you care for one, you care for the other. But Western society is a very mechanistic one, and the beliefs have been shaped by the machines that we created to make life easier for us, which ended up enslaving people to the clock, to the machines. So we moved from agrarian culture to an industrialized culture in the 1850s, where families were separated for long hours every day and children were warehoused. And this isolation and separation and disjointedness and disconnection from the mother, from earth, goes very deep in Western society. And in any culture that has absorbed the love of technology and what we are capable of doing, there is the downside, which is this disconnection from the earth and disconnection from ourselves. So pre and perinatal psychology is a field that grew up in the 1990s, but had its roots way back and had its roots in pre-industrial society. womb, what happens at conception, what happens at birth, and in the first hours and days afterwards. It's critically important. I'll give you an example from my own life. My mother was told by her obstetrician not to go into labor on a Tuesday, because Tuesday was his poker night. And I, being an Aries, started labor on a Tuesday because the baby starts labor. And we don't even know the mechanism of how that works. There's so much that's still a mystery. At any rate, he refused to come to the birth. And when my mother had drugs, and then she was pushing, and he still refused to come. And in those days in the hospital in the 1940s in the United States, if the nurse dared to allow the baby to be born before the obstetrician arrived, because we had a system of nurses and obstetricians, not midwives, then she would lose her job. So she held my mother's legs together and pushed my head back with every contraction. And somehow he finally arrived, and I was allowed to be born. But this feeling of pressure, this feeling of being driven, has been a pattern in my life that I've been working on for decades to release. It's a pattern that started very, very early. It's this feeling of not being allowed to come forth and not being allowed to come out into the world. My daughter, on the other hand, had a lot of drugs, because I was given a lot of drugs in labor, wanting a natural childbirth and not being able to see a birth before I gave birth, knowing that I needed to see a birth to just somehow loosen up my fear that I would die in birth. Well, that fear came from how I was born, but I didn't know that because my mother hadn't told me the story until after I gave birth. She didn't tell me that. So when my daughter was born in a hospital, in the basement of a hospital, in a windowless room, and with one drug after another, drugs to sedate me, and then drug to speed up the labor, and sedate me, speed up the labor, sedate me, speed up the labor. And then I was given a spinal, and then I was given a caudal. Anyway, every drug that was given to me was taken off the market a few years later, because it was found, each one was found to directly affect the baby. And an example of that is buccal pitocin, which is sometimes called oxytocin. And it was wafers put up against the woman's gums. And nobody knew at the time that the drug went directly into the baby from the mother. So this is an example of how unconsciously we have tried to control birth and shift birth, change it to make it, quote, predictable and safer, and in the process have introduced an awful lot of harm. So my daughter's patterns that started around her birth have to do with getting ready to do things and then just suddenly collapsing, which is an example of what happens when anesthesia is introduced into the baby's body. Because when it's introduced into the mother, it goes to the baby. And I want to tell you these things because the patterns that we carry in our lives have so much to do with life in the womb, with our birth, with our conception. And pre and perinatal psychology brought those connections together. And it's a field that has been fraught with complexity, because it's so easy to blame mothers for what happens in life anyway. Women are highly socialized to feel guilt and shame. So if you talk to women about the biological needs of a baby, for example, the physiological needs of a baby in the womb, and that mother didn't get that for her baby, wasn't able to get that because of how she was socialized and the forces in her life that pushed her to, for example, have a scheduled cesarean, a birth without any labor. She will immediately feel blamed and wrong. And so you can't talk about it. And there's a lot of this that goes on in women's magazines around the world too, which is women who've had really extraordinary births, ecstatic births, who've had long breastfeeding with their babies, who've experienced consciously conceiving and really feeling that baby come in to them, feel shamed about talking about it because other women will feel bad. So I mention that because all of the work that each of you is doing, whether it's to be a midwife or an activist or someone working in postpartum or a therapist working around birth, is going to be affected by the culture in which you live. And the culture in which we live is one that is, almost all of us, for hundreds of years now, affected by the notion that we can improve on everything by doing artificial things. And of course, if you look at how amazingly we've been able to do things technologically that are wonderful, then why wouldn't people think that birth would benefit from a woman having drugs in labor, not having to feel contractions, from being able to select the time, the day when her baby is born? Why wouldn't we think that that's not just acceptable, but it's perfectly useful for her and the baby? But it has deep implications. So I wanted to start with that because it's the field that you're working in has so many paradoxes. There are women who died, many women who died, and babies who died because of ignorance, mostly because the women were malnourished, had babies too close together, didn't have the kind of support they need, were frightened. But now we have many complications that arise from the very things that we are doing to make birth supposedly safe for everyone. So I wanted to start there just to remind you of the complexities of these issues and the seriousness of the work that you're doing. My view is that if we let people know what the biological needs are for the mother and baby to thrive, what the deep design that nature has created is, that we can let people know that almost nobody gets to do it, quote, perfectly. There's no such thing as perfect. Woman has a great pregnancy and she has a horrific birth. Woman has a great birth and pregnancy and she has problems breastfeeding, and it goes on and on. That we can let people know that what happened to them doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. And it also doesn't mean that there isn't an ideal situation, that there isn't an ideal environment in which to bring babies into the world and care for mothers, babies, fathers, and families. Does that make sense? So
Yes. Does that make sense to everyone so far? Would you like to take a question, or can I ask you a question, or would you like to carry on your flow?
No, any way you like.
I'm also just reflecting on some things that maybe I feel drawn to ask you to expand a bit more. So, and if anyone wants to pipe up a question now, you're also welcome, I think. maybe you can speak more about the mother and the baby being one unit during pregnancy and afterwards.
Okay,
Yeah.
I will.
And the importance of that design that you were speaking about, that's that biological design.
Yeah.
They kind of
Well,
go
human development is meant to unfold from one phase to the next. If it doesn't unfold fully, you'll still go to the next phase, even though you may not have completed the phase before it, because there is an unfolding. Mother and baby as one unit. Well, I'll give you an example after birth, that when the baby is at the mother's breast, and of course, in the United States, we're now supposed to call it chest feeding, not breastfeeding, because we have transgendered people who are having babies. But biologically, we are mammals, men and women. We are mammals, and we have breasts. Anyway, when the baby just simply nuzzles at the breast of its mother figure, hormones are released in that mother's gut. And I remember Dr. Marshall Klaus, the pediatrician who did so much work and research on human attachment with John Kennel and those two pediatricians, and then did the work and the research on doulas, modern doulas. When that baby simply licks the mother's breast, 20 hormones or more are released in that mother's gut. And those are the hormones that cause her to digest food better, to assimilate food better, so to be able to get the most out of food if she's obese and doesn't need the extra calories from food. It won't give her those, but if she's starving, it will allow her to extract every possible nutrient from the food she gets. It will release hormones to calm her, so that if and when the baby cries, she is in a relaxed state. And it also does things to the baby's gut. And we now know that the gut and brain are directly connected. And the human gut is like another brain. So that's an example of the mother-baby connection. Furthermore, right after birth, if the baby's put on the mother's chest, just simply nuzzling that flesh around her breast will cause her womb to contract so that it stops the bleeding. I mean, it's just amazing, the things that happen. And in the womb, what's really so important is the hormones of fear or trust that the mother has is releasing from her body into the baby. Because in the womb, the baby is experiencing not just all the mother's emotions, but it's also experiencing all the full range of human emotions. And you know, we live in societies that are putting enormous amounts of stress on women in pregnancy. So they are releasing stress. And these babies are not being born in warm, nurturing, dark, quiet environments. They're being born under bright lights. They're being born with a lot of drugs on board. They're being born with forceps or vacuum extractions, pulling them out, pressure on the baby's head. And then often the baby is separated from the mother and father, and then the mother doesn't get to breastfeed or doesn't get to breastfeed fully, has to go back to work early. And what we end up with is a pattern of detachment from Mother Earth and from our mother, because the mother is the universe to that baby, especially in the womb. All those months, the mother's the universe. How she is how the world is for that baby. So we have isolation, separation, and maternal deprivation. And that's the pattern for modern childbirth. And when you look at what's going on in the world and has been going on in the world for many, many years, the amount of violence that there is, interpersonal and societal and wars, is directly related to the fact that these babies, these children didn't receive what they needed to at the beginning of life to feel safe, to feel trusting. And I'm thinking of so many of the authoritarian figures now around the world, from Donald Trump to Putin, and you name them. The ones I know, India now has elected a very conservative woman. They are disconnected from their own bodies. I don't know what kind of traumas they had early in life, but clearly they had traumas, because their answer to things is not to nurture everyone, but to make it easier for the wealthy and harder for the ordinary people, because the ordinary people don't matter. The working people don't matter. So yeah, we've strayed so far from the biological blueprint. Oh, yeah, it just breaks my heart. And of course, in Colorado, we just had another mass shooting in a gay bar in a very conservative town where there are many fundamentalist Christians who are part of organizations in that town, churches and other organizations that hate people who are gay. And this just happened yesterday. Happens in Bali, happens all over the world. Who's doing these? These are really sick people. These are people who did not get what they needed at the beginning of life for their brains to form according to trust and according to a sense of all is well. So I want to go back even further to cellular biology, and then I'll stop. You can ask questions. Cell biology shows us that, and this is a fairly new field, that cells grow in a binary way. They either yes or no. They either grow in a state of defense or they grow fully. And they are always sensing the world around them and whether they need to defend themselves. We used to think that the brain of the cell was the nucleus, but it's not. It's the skin of the cell. It's the what encloses the cell, and it's constantly reading the environment. And if the environment is not safe, if that baby is growing in a womb where the mother is constantly being berated or abused or neglected, the cells of that baby will grow in a state of defense. And when cells, which create the organs of our body, grow in states of defense, they cannot grow fully. And so we are causing people to be damaged right from the beginning. And of course, this is true if the woman's conception, if the baby's conception was a rape or happened under alcohol. So cell biology shows us this, and the larger picture now is from the field called epigenetics, which is how factors above and around our genes affect whether those genes express themselves. And that happens in the weeks prior to conception. It happens throughout a person's life, but in the weeks prior to conception, the woman's egg or eggs can actually be shaped by how much stress she is under, as well as the kind of nutrition she's getting. So it can be physical stress, emotional stress, can be nutritional stress. But we now know also that the father's sperm is affected in the weeks prior, just the weeks prior to that conception. And if the father is under a great deal of stress, if the father is drinking, if the father has just lost his job, or let's say the mother's mother has just been diagnosed with cancer, things she has no control over, that will shape the genes that they are carrying and that go into that baby. And it will cause some genes to be turned on that wouldn't have been turned on before. They may have been passed down, but they won't be expressed in that child. So this is how you can have something like, well, in my case, I carry bipolar traits with slight manic and periods of depression. And it turns out that it's on both sides of my family, my Russian Jewish side and my Irish Celtic side. So it's strong. Those genes get passed down. But if the circumstances of the pregnancy and the late weeks just before conception and the birth are mostly positive, those genes, bipolar genes, will not be expressed in that child. They might get passed down to the next child and over to a cousin. And depending on the circumstances of that child's beginnings, the bipolar will express or not express. So these are very important things for us to understand, because they also have to do with how groups of people in different cultures pass on trauma from the past, from war, from famine, from various things. They get passed down culturally. And so the field of pre and perinatal psychology is looking at this. And the biological blueprint doesn't get to express itself fully when there are so many negative factors in the environment. Corey, what were you thinking? What did you want to ask, or anybody else?
Does anybody have a question they want to ask at this point? We can go with the flow. Oh. Okay. Okay, I will share something that I've been thinking, and maybe you can just also add your comment into it. It was a few years ago, and I was starting to see that the obstetricians in South Africa, well, they're gynae obstetricians, but they were stopping to do the obstetrics part of their gynae. Excuse me. Because of the medical indemnities, actually, and the risk of being sued, and so they didn't want to have anything to do with scans or care for anyone over 20 weeks, really, because of the charges. Wow. It would up their medical indemnity so much higher. So many doctors were only being gynaes and not obstetricians. So I started noticing this in South Africa, and I doing my work and thinking my stuff and creating my own path, and and I really realized that it's like, and this was a few years ago. So, and I think now we've watched it actually happen, but I could sense that this was too much. That almost like Western medicine had pushed it too far, because they were playing in a field where women were going to hurt too much to keep quiet. And they were almost like going for the guttural. So they were going for the, where it primarily gets us so much that we don't have you almost don't have a choice about how you react, because it's a primal reaction when your baby's taken away at your birth, or when you have a birth choice taken away from you, or when you don't have a voice in so many things around this. I thought, no, this is I mean, I'd seen abuse and authority and patriarchy through medicine in many different ways, but I just realized this was a place that it was going to crack. It was going to crack women, but it was also going to crack medicine. because women were going to start standing up, and medicine was going to have to start listening. And I think in some ways it has happened, but COVID also just like exposed, for me, COVID exposed this, because I had understood that the very heart of healing and listening to Gabor Mate and listening to people that I really connected with about understanding healing, and what you are explaining about primal imprinting and how it affects how we perceive and feel in the world. And I was realizing that probably the most effective way to create traumatized people is to interrupt the mother-baby bond during pregnancy and birth and postpartum.
That's right. That is right. And to put the woman under a great deal of stress in the time just before she gets pregnant.
So maybe you can explain what is happening with the baby and the prenatal imprinting, and just, yeah, more about that.
Well, when the mother is under stress, and I don't mean the normal stress of, dinner is late, or her partner's coming home and brought the wrong food for dinner, or, but under the kind of stress like her mother just died, or her partner just lost his job, that translates directly into hormones that go directly into the baby, the developing baby. And instead of the baby feeling, and I see you've got a baby there, instead of the baby experiencing mostly calm and positive hormones, the baby is constantly bombarded by stress hormones. And it just happens that when these stressors are too often, too strong, the baby's brain develops along that line, because the baby we're built to defend ourselves from outside problems, from we're built to defend ourselves when we need to, but we're not built to be in a state of constant anxiety. And when a mother is in labor and she's given oxytocin to speed up the labor, or when she is given a drug to start labor artificially, then the stress hormones are released in that mother, and they go straight to the baby, and they carry through the birth and afterwards, and they affect how often she picks up that baby when the baby cries, how often she cuddles the baby, whether she feels she's a good mother. So it's also interactive. If the mother doesn't feel good about herself, if she's not able to get herself into a safe place, then it's very hard for her to respond to a baby in a way that is most appropriate for that child, however that child is developing. And it's also true that the male of the species is more vulnerable than the female. And I want to say something about that, because most people aren't aware of it. We still exist in societies organized around male domination. And whether it's a man who's carrying out the orders, or whether it's a woman who's been dominated or abused or traumatized who's carrying out the orders, it doesn't matter. It's patriarchy. It is male domination. And so when boys are born whose fathers were stressed just before conception, greatly stressed, and in the womb, those boys will be much more vulnerable to stress after birth. And as toddlers, they will be much more likely to act out in self-harming or harmful ways, because boys are innately more vulnerable than girls, because girls are wired, designed, built to carry on the race. That's just the way it is. And it takes longer for boys to develop fully than girls. So if you have a boy and a girl born who are about the same age and the same circumstances in their lives, same gestational age, fully developed, the boy will actually be about 6 weeks behind the girl in his development. And nurses know this in hospitals, in intensive care nurseries. They're always more nervous about the boy babies who are very small or very premature than they are about the girls. Nature actually creates more boys than girls, knowing that more of them will die than girls. So I want to mention that, because what we're dealing with around the world, whether we're looking at crimes being committed by men or women, is we're looking at things happening as a result of male domination in societies where men are not healthy, where men are not getting their needs met at the very beginning of life. They're toughened up. We think we can toughen them up, and that's going to make them strong. And what it does, toughening them up, which is shaming them, which is not picking them up when they cry, and it can come to any number of things. Actually, we're making them weaker, and we're making them more defensive. And they grow up to be men who are extremely brittle and who are incapable of expressing their full range of emotions. They can express anger really well, but they have a hard time with subtle emotions. They have a hard time expressing love. They have a hard time expressing, feelings of comfort. These men are damaged. And the women who have been raised like that are damaged too. And they carry out the same kind of policies when they become heads of countries. And I'm thinking of Margaret Thatcher. I'm thinking of, and now I'm looking at Netanyahu getting elected again in Israel. And I watched a whole film about Netanyahu's background and the fundamentalism with which he was raised, and fear. It was constant fear. And when people are placed in fear, then what comes out is defense and aggression, or self-abuse. So trauma plays throughout history a huge role in the development of societies and in the development of families. And the smaller the family unit and the more dysfunctional the parents are, the less fully they have developed in a state of trust, the more that child is getting a constant barrage of the negative. Now, in a culture where it's like a village culture or an extended family where there's 5 or 6 different adults, maybe 10 different adults, and the child can wander from one to another, one hut to another. If mama's not feeling good, the toddler's going to wander off and go to somebody who's singing a song. But in our families, more and more, there's only 2 people, 2 highly stressed people caring for a child, when there needs to be 4 or 5 adults nurturing that child, nurturing the parents. So it's a mess. And until we get back to this, what Darshan Narvaez calls the evolved nest, this feeling of layers of support around the child, layers of support around the parents, we're going to see people behaving in ways that are not helpful to children, that are not helpful to the parents, and it gets passed on and on and on. Now that's a pretty harsh view that I'm presenting, but you're not going to hear it from a lot of people, and I want you to get it, because it can change. We could transform societies and cultures in one generation by not epigenetically change, causing the genes of aggression, the genes of depression, the genes of schizophrenia, of addiction to express themselves, because women are in a place of safety where women are treated as sacred, where bringing a child into the world is considered sacred, and where everything is done to make that environment as gentle and as nurturing as possible. And when pharmaceutical drugs or technology needs to be brought in because there's a problem that doesn't resolve on its own or with simple approaches, then it's wonderful, then it's welcomed. But that doesn't mean it doesn't cause trauma, because you still have to deal with the trauma caused by the cesarean, for example, that was done because there was a prolapsed cord, or there was a separation of the uterus from the uterine wall, and there was hemorrhaging, and that baby needed to be born immediately. The baby seems to know when the intervention was needed, and it's much easier for the child to deal with it than when it's not needed. So I am not against technology. I'm not against the many advancements that we have made in being able to deal with very serious complications and deal with them quickly. I am against the use of them when they're not needed, and I'm against the lack of understanding that when we go against what the nature has designed as the way in which humans are meant to develop in order to develop fully, there are consequences, and those consequences are trauma, and the trauma has to be dealt with. The trauma has to be released. The trauma has to be integrated into the body. But for so many people, life was so stressful so early on, they left their body long ago, and they may be geniuses from here up, living in their brains. But when it comes to being able to actually live in their body and connected to our Mother Earth, they aren't. And I would urge you to look at people in the street. Look how they walk. Look how they carry themselves. And even more than that, I would urge each of us to embark on a journey to discover the history in our families, to become detectives of our own life. It was not until I was in my, 40s that I really began to look back at the generations behind. And then in my 60s to look back at the kinds of trauma that happened to Russian Jews. My grandmother on my mother's side was a Ukrainian Jew, and she experienced the pogroms of the Russian Cossacks coming into the villages and looting and pillaging and burning the houses and raping the women and murdering the children. That came through her lineage down into me. On my father's side, there's the Irish Celtic famine, the potato famine of the 1860s, directly came down to my family. So I'm doing work to actually let go of the stress of other generations as well. Now, Gabor Mate talks a lot about this because he understands trauma very deeply. He was one of the babies born at the beginning of World War II, when his country was occupied, and talks about all the pediatrician in the neighborhood coming to his mother and saying that all the boy babies were crying because they knew what was happening all around them. So I embarked on a journey to understand myself as much as to change the world. And it's not been easy, but it's been extremely rewarding. And it has to do with physical healing, psychological healing, emotional healing, mental healing, healing of thought patterns. I have a tendency when things go wrong to make everything worse in my mind. And my husband does the same thing. He has this expectation that something is going to go wrong. And, you know, there's a joke that people make about this kind of thinking, that if you expect the worst and you don't have the worst happen, things can only get better from there. But this, in his case, comes from being unwanted. He was an unwanted child. He was unwanted in the womb. He was unwanted at birth. It wasn't his mother's fault. She had heart disease. She shouldn't have had children in the first place. And he was the last of 5 children. And he came 8 years after the child before him. So he was completely neglected and unwanted. His psyche is quite different from mine because I actually was a wanted child from my mother, not wanted and had abuse from my father. But my parents gave me a lot of physical of attention. And so Bob's tendency when he's under stress is to want to pull away. My tendency is to want to reach out to other people, to call someone to get help, because when I'm in a depression, I tend to isolate, and it's not a good thing to do. So these patterns that carry into our adulthood all have their roots in perinatal time and in the history of our families and in our culture. So anyway, I said I would urge you to become a detective of your own life. And when I talk to college students about psychology and pre and perinatal psychology, that's what I urge them to do. Find out what happened. Find out what was going on in the world when your mother was pregnant with you. And you can't go at it by saying, Mom, I'm having a lot of anxiety and I'm wondering, did you have a lot of anxiety when you were carrying me? No, that's not the way to do it, because women immediately get defensive and don't want to talk about it because they feel guilty. Just say, I want to know what your life was like when you were carrying me. I want to know what was going on in the world. I have a friend, a midwife, who had years of depression and had a lot of psychotherapy around depression. And it was pretty intractable. She was just unable to get to the source of it until she happened on the fact that during the entire time her mother was pregnant with her, the Allied forces, of which the Americans were a part, had lost every single battle to Hitler. So her mother was steeped in anxiety. Now, did knowing that make the depression go away? No, but it gave her insight into how to work with it. It gave her more compassion for herself, and it allowed her to think more creatively about what to do when she was feeling depressed, rather than just feeling there was something wrong with her. Gori, what are you thinking?
A lot. I'm thinking a lot. I want to just share what some people have written in the chats to just catch up with that.
Okay.
Manjari Priya also writes that she has a direct example of prenatal imprinting And she's connecting when her grandmother was pregnant with her father. Her grandfather, the husband of the pregnant mother, passed away. And as a consequence, she says, my father was born with heart disease, some sort of cardiac insufficiency. So you're connecting the passing away of the father was such a heart breaking.
Yes. Yes,
Yes.
that's right. There
It gives
is a
us so much
field.
compassion for our own parents, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially because they grew up in a time, many of them, when it was not considered okay to seek help. I mean, my father was pretty crazy, and he was crazy from a narcissistic mother, and he was crazy from being traumatized in World War II. He was one of the people who opened up the concentration camps after they pulled out the living. So he had to walk over all the dead bodies. And he brought that trauma combined with his own early trauma back to the family. And he abused each of us children. And he was very sick. And he would never accept help because he was what I call the brittle male. He had not received what he needed as a child. And he had very few resources to draw upon when he had anger and memories and other things come up. Yeah,
So
it does give us more compassion.
compassion. Namanta also writes, she can't speak right now through the mic, so she's just writing. Now, Namanta is due with her baby right now, just to fill you in. So she says, this is such a deep topic, also very painful to engage with. What do we do with all our regrets from pregnancy and negativity we couldn't help passing on to our unborn children? And she's going to look out for your
Okay.
book.
That's a
I think
really,
that's a
really
very
good
important
question.
Yeah.
It's very important. First of all, telling our children in the womb, as well as when they're visible to us, how we are feeling and what happened, but not doing it with a lot of emotion, dealing it emotionally with other adults. You know, if we have great regrets about what happened in pregnancy, work with that apart from the child, but then simply explain to the child, you know, I didn't know when I was pregnant with you that da 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 da, and I'm sorry. I wish it hadn't happened. I wish your father hadn't left, you know, but to be able to talk truthfully to a child is a huge important factor. If the child's in the womb, to be able to say, I'm having a really bad day. I'm feeling extraordinarily anxious, but it isn't about you, sweetheart. I'm going to deal with it. It isn't about you. Your job is to grow and be happy. I'm so glad you're there. Or when I first found out I was pregnant with you, I really didn't want to have a baby. And it took me many months before I really wanted to have you. And I'm sorry, but I sure want to have you now. You know, it wasn't about you. It was about me. It was about what was going on in my life with Daddy and me. And babies are able to, at a consciousness level, separate themselves from the parent if the parent gives them a framework with which to do that. And I said early on, you know, that I thought if I didn't tell my daughter what I was feeling emotionally, she wouldn't experience it. Well, not only did she experience it, she experienced the loneliness of feeling isolated, that she experienced it and her mother wasn't connected to her. Does that help you with your question?
Amanda, I think she can't use her mic right now, but you can write, or somebody can ask if they want to deepen on this specific topic. How can we protect our children? You wrote later.
Well, there
Is it
is a
possible to
wonderful.
reverse the in utero effects? Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just
Oh,
asking, is it possible to reverse the in utero effects while you're on this?
thank you, Neha. Is it possible to what? Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's not possible to have negative experiences disappear if we had them. It is possible for them to make us strong because of how we deal with them, because of how much support we get for dealing with them. There is a man named Robin Grill, Grille, who has written a number of fine books. He's a psychotherapist, family counselor in Australia. And Robin, his most recent book, and I can't remember the name of it right now, has practices that people can do. Let's see if I can find this. Practices that people can do to address the woundedness inside themselves. Robin Grill. Well, there's Inner Child Journeys. He's also written Parenting for a Peaceful World and Inner Child Journeys. We're not going to make the world safe for children immediately, but we could sure work toward it. We could work toward making it so that when new products are brought out, that they have to be tested to be shown that they are safe for a developing child's brain. That's an example of something. We have in the United States a product called Roundup. Now, Roundup is actually used all across the world. It's a weed killer, so-called. And it's already known to be proven to be harmful to babies' brains, but we don't think babies are important in children's brains. We don't think they're important. And what rules much of the world today is profit and what is going to make profit. So we have not been able to get that off the market. It's off the market in Europe, but you see, it's a big challenge. We can let people know who are working in environmental issues that the issue of how babies' brains develop and how much toxicity there is that are getting to babies and children is of critical importance to the environmental movement. We outlawed DDT in the United States as a horrific chemical. So it's been found in mother's milk in Florida. Why? Because the United States buys products from Mexico where we dumped our DDT after it became illegal in the United States. It didn't become illegal to put it in another country. No, we didn't try to decide how to actually detoxify DDT. No. We just dumped it on other countries, and then we buy produce from those countries and we get DDT in our milk. It's like, we are all connected. We have to understand. Yeah, it was also dumped in Africa. It's true. And it's just so important for people to understand that these things are going on. And when we have that kind of understanding, first of all, what comes is enormous amounts of grief and anger that it's happened. But we can then use that anger, we can feel the grief and sorrow, and we can use the anger to motivate us to do something to make changes. Because the people who are most affected and most traumatized in the world today are the ones who are the least capable of handling it. They're the ones who are the poorest. They are the ones who are the most disenfranchised, the ones who are the least educated. And I know we need to take a break, so we could do that and then come back. What do you think, Gori?
Yeah, there's so many lovely questions here. So we can come back to these questions and to hear more questions from you, all people here, and to also share if you have any experience of anything reflecting this. We'll go around and have a chance.
And also, I do have this PowerPoint, which has a lot of visuals that might be good to help you think about some of the things I have spoken of.
Yeah, and I see Namanta just came on. So just to close off, because you were just answering her question about Namanta, do you have a question?
I just wanted to say thank you for that answer. It touches my heart actually. That it is like just by talking, just talk to the baby. That gives me some hope for dealing with difficult stuff in a heartfelt way, that it can still be okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanti.
And I'd also like to come back to Maven's question here, which is how to help mums that we work with be aware of this without adding a lot of pressure onto them, how to tell them without making them feel guilty about the hard times they have in their pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. But let's take a break and we'll read through here and try and come back to everyone. And also, if we don't, then just express it in a question. Okay, we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thank you, Suzanne, for being able to hop on and hop off. And hop back on.
Yeah, shall I stay on? Okay, I will.
And a loo break, get some water.
All right, love.
Right. So welcome back from the break. Yeah, it definitely brings up big things. And yeah, so let's hear. So what are the signs? This was a question for Suzanne, so hopefully she'll pop back on. But if she doesn't, we can still discuss here. And what are the signs that we can see in a baby and later a toddler of in utero constant stress and trauma? And we can maybe leave that one for Suzanne and just read some of the comments and come back. So profound and important. Is it possible to reverse? Okay, we covered that a bit. So much agree to what Suzanne is saying. From the first days in this world, and probably before that, until I left home, this is from Manjari, I left home at 19, and she had witnessed her father physically, emotionally abusing my mother. So I developed an intense subconscious fear of men and being hurt so much so that anyone, especially a man, raising his voice would result in me completely disassociating from my body and going into a free state. So much work still to be done. Thank you so much for speaking about it. Yeah. But it's interesting because what you brought up is also like a processing that takes place in yourself, but also you know that some of that processing is not yours. You know that that's what you experienced in your mother's body, but it's not yours. It was her fear, not yours. And yeah, so it does bring up a lot. Understanding the cause gives the better solution, gives you the ability to find a better solution for that cause. And Marianne's Anna Favar, that's true. Maybe I'll put the link up. Yeah, she comes. My mouse is okay. Anna Faval is a very good person to also look up. She did a nice TEDx presentation, Womb to World. And she also expresses this very passionately and very nicely. Anna Faval from Womb to World. Suzanne?
Yeah. Oh,
Hello.
hi, everybody.
Hello.
There were three things I wanted to talk about that I didn't mention because I know what I've talked about is pretty sobering. The first is that every human being I know comes in with their own suchness. And we cannot take that away from them, whatever it is. And being their parent or helping a woman and a man understand that these children they're bringing in also have their own destiny and their own spiritual journey is very, very important. I came to understand that the kind of birth I had and the kind of abuse I had from my father was instrumental in the work I came to do in making me sensitive to what is going on in the world and sensitive to the issue of trauma and to people who have had a lot of trauma and sensitive around the whole area of birth. That's one thing. The second thing is that don't do anything alone. Find a community. Right here, you've got a community that's started. Continue to meet, continue to talk. It's so important to have people when you're living in a world that does not affirm what you know to be true. It's so important to have people around you who can mirror what it is you're saying and what you're feeling, and to give you just to give you the feedback that what you're doing is good and it's enough. One of the things that happens when people have trauma early in life, and they don't get their needs fully met, is we tend to think that it's all about us and we have to be the ones to fix it. That I know I have a huge dose of that, the sense that if I don't do this, the world's going to collapse. And it's really much more about me as a little baby feeling that if I'm not cared for, because my mother didn't breastfeed me because the doctor told her not to, you know, we can go on and on about that, but that if I didn't get my needs met, then I will desperately try to make things happen, or I will go the other direction and go into a feeling of hopelessness, as so many people do. And they don't bother to participate and they don't bother to vote because they feel that nothing matters, because they feel they don't matter. So it's really important that we have community. The third thing I wanted to mention that I didn't was ritual, and how critically valuable I feel it is for us to do things that call in the dimensions beyond this realm, that call in the sacred, that call in the ancestors, that call in the whatever you want to call it, whether you call it God or you call it the great mystery. If we can tap into that, whether it's a spiritual practice that includes meditation, whether it involves sacred song, chanting, dancing. I know the midwives in the United States, when we had conferences, the midwives would often sing songs. We are sisters on a journey, singing in the sun, remembering the ancient ones, the women and the wisdom, the women and the wisdom. We'd sing songs like that, or it was just wonderful. We'd play music together, we'd sing, and it helped us get through the times when so many midwives doing home births were being arrested were being persecuted. Yeah, I can remember singing to a group of men who were dealing with circumcision issues. Newborn circumcision is still done so much in the United States. And I was a speaker, and I ended up singing to them, "How could anyone ever tell you you were anything less than beautiful?" Anyway, I can't even go through it without crying. How could anyone ever tell you you were less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle and how deeply you're connected to the whole? I also sang that to a group of nurse midwives in Philadelphia who were under siege in their hospital. Ritual is important, community is important. Telling the truth about what's going on with ourselves and with the world is important, but we can only take so much of it in. And we have to have things in our lives that have nothing to do with the work that we are doing that is so precious, because the work you're doing is sacred. And I try to remind myself the work I do is sacred. And when I've had enough during the day and I've had enough about the climate and the violence, I watch movies. I watch comedies. I don't stay in that place because it's not helpful. So I wanted to tell you those three things. Facing what the truth is, being willing to grieve over it, and also use our anger, our rage to motivate us to do something, and having community, creating community, and doing ritual, and connecting to the forces that are beyond us, to the realms that are, well, and the dimensions that are pulling for us. Yeah. I'm at the end of a depression, so this is what you're getting. Sorry about that.
No, thank you. I think we all feel moved by the energy that was coming through there, because we all feel struck by it so strongly. And also just bringing in that kind of universal truth, which is just there all the time and is so available and beautiful to all of us, and has become now like almost a theme through the last few days, because singing and connecting with Mother Nature, or whatever we want to call it, is maybe this is the wisdom of birth, you know. We're learning the language of the wisdom of birth, because there's wisdom in birth that we need to hear to understand birth. We're trying to understand birth from the outside. So when you're speaking like this, there's an energy that we're receiving. So so thank you. Yeah, it's there's been lots of comments, and I'm not going to be able to keep up with reading them all. So if anybody right now wants to share, Shasta, maybe you want to share your story with us, or yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
First, I just want to say that 28 years ago, your book changed my life. 28 years ago. I was 19 years old, and I was pregnant with my first child. At 19, so much was going on I was at university, and I was like, oh, and everybody said, you're crazy, you can't keep the baby. And I was like, I'm keeping this baby. I just need to figure it out. And I went into the university library, and your book came to me. I ended up going into the bush in Zambia when I realized, after my one visit with the gynae, and then your book resonated, because the gynae said, and you'll have this, and you'll have pitocin, and you'll have this and that and the other, and that's how your birth will go. And I thought, I can't do it that way. And I went back. My parents were Quakers, and so they were also spiritual activists. But I went back to the bush in Zambia, and your book was my companion. And I birthed because I felt so strongly to birth along the biological norm. I asked, how can I birth this baby as best I can along the biological normal, the normal that this child expects to come into the world with? So I birthed on my own in the middle of the bush. And I got the birth that I wanted. So I can't begin to tell you how emotional I feel sitting here with you speaking, because for the last 28 years, you've been very much in my landscape. So it's beautiful. But I also wanted to just share very quickly a healing story, because we are healing one person at a time, one birth at a time. We're doing the healing work. I was born under every kind of drug as well. My mother was unconscious when I was born. I wasn't breastfed, the typical 1974 birth. And my parents were in an extreme state of stress. The Zimbabwe war was brewing. There was all sorts of stuff happening on the political landscape. And afterwards, my father went through a spiritual metanoia and became a Quaker. And he started healing. He started the healing work through his work as an activist Quaker, but also he actively said to me over and over, you can change everything that didn't happen in the right way. And so he was also influential in making the decisions. And he actually died. He died during my first pregnancy. And so your book and his death was carried hand in hand to move through and still birth in the way that he believed could change the world. And everything that you are saying now is, it's all parts of the puzzle that fitted in, and that brought me to where I am in the work that I do as well. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. You know, what you remind me of is that, and you say part of the puzzle is we don't necessarily know what the whole picture is, and we don't necessarily know how important our piece is, but we have to learn to trust that our piece is critically important. Yeah. You know, there's a lot on my website, birthingthefuture.org, including talks that I have given. And one of them is a talk I gave called The Roots of Loneliness and Spiritual Alienation. Anyway, in the center of the homepage, Birthing the Future. And I didn't know what I was doing when I wrote Immaculate Deception. I just knew I had to write something about birth. It wasn't anything I read or knew or heard about. And it just poured through me. It just, somehow it opened the fact that my birth was really traumatic, opened something in me. And that book poured through me, and it was the right time, the right place. And apparently I was the one that had to do it. And you may never know who you are affecting, each of you, Megan, Lisa, Kulina, Namanta, you know, you may never know, or you may be fortunate enough someday to find that something that you said made a tremendous difference to another person. But you have to trust that the work you are doing is sacred and valuable, and that you will be led to do what you're meant to do, especially if you find a community of support.
Does anybody want to speak? in response or to ask a question, or if you wrote it down, you can say it. Lisa? Nikita, do you want to speak? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into my story because I don't want to make it about myself, but I just wanted to say that a lot of what Suzanne just said resonates with me in terms of parents coming from an abusive childhood themselves. And then, you know, I'm in a space where I can talk about all of this when it has affected me so deeply without actually crying, because I've reached a point where I've been able to kind of integrate this whole experience, as well as being able to understand that it was not my parents' fault, and it really wasn't their parents' fault either. So it's the generational trauma that we all are going through, and it definitely has led me to this work as well. That Suzanne just said, that, you know, I truly believe that who I am today and where it has led me to had its roots in my own childhood experience, because I went through, or whatever we went through is why I'm so drawn to helping babies being born in a peaceful world. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
But my question is around the fact that, you know, which was also asked by someone in chat, how do we help babies born in an environment of stress, which is actually going to be almost all babies, right? What are the signs that we can watch out for, and how do we help them?
Talk to them, talk to them, hold them, talk to them. I know a midwife in an inner city in the United States she blesses the baby when they come in, and she says, "Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I see you. I'm so glad you're here." And she might be the only person who ever affirms that, but it's there in that child. So talk to the babies. It reminds me of a story of a midwife in England who talked to the baby talked to the mother by talking to the baby. The mother was having a very difficult labor, and she wasn't wanting to let this baby out. And the midwife found herself talking to the baby. "Come on, baby, you can do this. You can do this. Yes, I see you." And a little bit of head showing. "That's it. You go back and you rest. Come on, baby." She was talking to the mother while she talked to the baby. She didn't have any children. This just came through her. One of the challenges with people who are working in hospital settings is so often they are armored against allowing themselves to feel vulnerable in a birth, in a labor, and they have not taken the time to really look at what's gone on in their lives that has caused them to be in this position of, in American hospitals, control. And it's a very lonely place to be. And suicide among doctors is very high these days. And I believe a lot of it is because they are trying to uphold something that is a defense against the pain that they're actually feeling and seeing. Does that make sense? So allowing yourself to feel this, allowing yourself to be touched by the woman who is in a circumstance that you might not be able to change, or you might have some tiny impact by simply saying, I see you, Sarah. I see what you're going through. I know you will find a way to leave this relationship, or I know you will find the support you need, but I see you. It's a gorgeous baby there, Tanika. When we do work on our own trauma, it is important not to have the baby in the room at that time, not to have the baby present. If we're doing a ritual, for example, let's say we're doing a sacred circle for a woman who's had a really traumatic birth, and there's a group of her friends and maybe the doula, maybe even the midwife who are there with her. The baby does not need to be there. The baby needs to be with someone else. She can tell her birth story. She can cry. She can go through all the feelings she has to release in the presence of these people in a sacred circle. And the healing that does will be transmitted to the baby in the way she holds the baby, in the way she can look at the baby in the months to come.
Does anybody have another question or share at this point?
Yes, Corey, I had this question about how to help the moms to understand that without putting some guilt on them or some pressure. How to help them to have this awareness without making them paranoid about it.
Yes. Well, one of the things I would recommend Robin Grill's book, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but that's a real important thing because he has
I'll
processes.
send them on an email.
That would be wonderful. It's very important to recognize that many men going through pregnancy and birth and in the first weeks postpartum feel very alone, feel very unneeded, unwanted. It may bring back for them feelings as an infant of not having had their needs met, not having been picked up when they cried, not having been breastfed. The small things that you can say to a man really matter, taking a little time to just meet with him and listen. How are you? How are you feeling? Taking him out into the hallway if you're in a hospital setting. Saying, I notice that da-da-da-da-da-da. Is this hard for you? It's very difficult. Men carry a big burden of being raised in male shaming, toxic cultures, and it carries through the generations, If you're going to cry, I'll give you something to cry about. Sissy. I mean, the worst things that boys can be called are negative terms for the feminine. You're just a wuss in English. You're just a pussy. You're just, and that's the last thing a boy wants to feel, is that he's less than. And he takes that in very deeply. And so it's likely when the woman is very emotional in pregnancy, birth, or afterwards, that he's not going to be able to give her the support and empathy that she needs, because he didn't get it. So somebody needs to give it to him. I did some birth education with a midwife where we had a series of classes, and one of the evenings was just for men, and it was about male vulnerability. It was to really listen to men and how they were feeling, and I think it was very, very helpful. It's a big question. We need to bring them along, and at the same time, the center of this whole experience has to be the mother and baby. So it's paradoxical. By that I mean it's two things that seem like they couldn't possibly coexist, supporting the father and focusing on the mother and baby, but they do exist. Yeah, asking him questions about how he's doing in his work. Does he feel heard at work? Is there anybody who he can connect with when he feels lonely or jealous of the baby? Just even naming those things, sometimes just giving a name to them helps a person take the next step. You know, one of the big jobs that I feel we have as people who are working in the sacred realm of birth is helping people connect the issues, helping people connect the issue of breastfeeding to the environment, of connecting murder of gays in a bar, to having been shamed as a child for being sensitive and being afraid of being that kind of person who was so demeaned by your parents or by your religion. Sometimes just making the connection and showing people that there really is a connection. I mean, my feeling of the biggest issue these days is that it's about climate and extinction. Extinction of species and about climate devastation. But I'm working at it through birth because I feel that we can raise a generation of human beings who will not turn away from what the issues are, who will take a stand. And you all know about Greta Thunberg in Sweden, who was the activist who ended up speaking, I think you probably all know her, ended up speaking to Parliament and various leaders around the world in the sense of rage that she had, that she tried to wake people up. She was early, she was ahead of her time, but she started this movement. And Greta was a very sensitive child who for a number of years, they were afraid she wouldn't even survive because she wouldn't eat. She felt the pain of the world. And she has had a place that is absolutely critical. She woke many of us up. So you never know what your work is going to be. I'm looking at you with your baby, Kanika. When someone says you have such a lovely baby, he seems so happy. You say, yes, he was consciously conceived, and I made sure I had a low stress pregnancy, and I gave birth at home, and I'm breastfeeding. Don't let it just pass. Oh yes, he's a nice baby, I'm lucky. This happened because I made decisions, because I made choices. Well, he was born by cesarean, and I have slept with him his entire infancy because I know he lacked the stimulation that he would have gotten in a vaginal birth. Give them a bit of education. Do you want to see this little PowerPoint? See if it brings home a few things? We can go through it quickly
Yes.
and see, because it's got a lot of
Yeah.
images.
I think that would be a good way to end. I just want to check in with Maven if you wanted to add any, if that was your question, if you feel satisfied, or did you also want to know about not putting pressure on a mom were you kind of navigating not wanting a mom to feel guilty when we like have life happen to us on the way to being a perfect parent?
Yes, I'm still interested in if we can develop this point.
Yeah. Okay. Could you speak a little bit more about that? Because
I
here we all are in our
say it again.
imperfect states, and all these. I mean, the number of things I can tell you that happened during my pregnancies, and like with Shami, like everything happened. And so how do we not feel guilty, you know, and then in postpartum and in parenting, how do we not load guilt on when we're imperfect? Yeah. Is that it, Maven?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, because once people go into guilt, they stop being able to take in new information, and they stop being able to grow. I feel guilty. Don't talk to me about about this. I'm feeling guilty. It's I think that's a time when we can bring in our own story. You know, there are so many things that happened in my birth that I wish hadn't happened, or in my pregnancy. And I've had to grieve that, because I didn't know what was possible. I allowed myself to be taken advantage of, or, you know, whatever. Things happened that I had no control over, and it's taken me a long time to recognize the forces that were shaping me, that were pushing on me, that caused me to either make decisions or allow others to make decisions for me that weren't good. And I hear what you're saying. You know, you can affirm, I hear what you're saying. It is hard. And there's so many things that we wish were different. Yeah. So sometimes there's no real answer to a person except to be present with them. Something that my husband is constantly trying to get me to realize, that he doesn't want to be fixed. He didn't have a mother who did any mothering, so he learned to do everything himself. And when he's feeling bereft about something, I want to jump in, and as a good Jewish mother, and give him a suggestion. It's not what he wants. He just wants me to listen. Just be there. Gosh. Yeah. That must feel awful. Is that a help? See, I want to fix it. Oh.
Nikita?
Yeah,
I think
so
just before that, I just want to add one thing that I find these opportunities, it's just like they're constantly giving us a chance to actually practice our remothering of ourselves, when we practice to be like so patient with ourselves when we like made another mistake, and we get to greet another day with like, okay, today I'm not going to shout at my kid, or today I'm not going to get angry with my husband, or today I'm going to, you know, not what, you know.
And I'm going to apologize when I do. You know, it's
Yeah,
like,
this
"Whoop,
constant,
I tried to fix again. Sorry.
so it's like this constant, like just space of remothering ourselves and just
Yeah.
giving us ourselves this constant space of like being able to make a mistake and then just pick ourselves up and carry on again and again. There's no time for guilt. You just kind of reach a time where there's actually just really no time for guilt, because what is the point? It's just in the way of getting where you want to get. So ditch the guilt and just get on with where you streamlining towards that rainbow. You know, just like keep going back to the light. Just keep, oh right, oh we didn't go back, we got off going to the light. Well, that's great, we got the reminder. Now we need to go back to the light. That's all it is, reminding us, go back to the light.
Yeah. I sometimes do a sitting meditation practice. I'd like to say I do it every day, but I don't. Sometimes I'll do it every day for a week, and then I won't do it for 3 months. But when I'm sitting, my tendency is always to shame myself when I find myself going into spinning thoughts, instead of just bringing myself back to my body, feeling my breath, just like we do when we've got a puppy that we're training to go on, you know, the newspaper instead of the rug. You just bring the puppy back to the newspaper, instead of blaming and shaming the puppy and beating it, which is what unfortunately a lot of people do. But it's a constant thing, because we come from cultures so full of guilt and shame. Yeah. And the notion of perfection.
Yeah. There's a question here. I read the question and then it took me off track from what you were saying. So let's go to the question. That's from Matumati, about the stress in dad and mom affects the cells of the baby. There are lots of couples who are struggling to conceive, and they undergo stress every cycle. They are depressed to understand the fact itself, and how can we help them?
Oof.
So this is about the conceiving.
Yeah, and especially since the sperm count is going down and has been going down since 1972 when they started studying it. It's gone down, 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 and it has to do with the pesticides in our food and the other chemicals that are toxic to sperm. So one of the things that we can do is let people know that they're living in an environment that is very toxic. It's understandable. There are many people in the same situation, and to find a time and a space, perhaps each day, where they can connect to this imagined baby that they're wanting to conceive. Now, there's also herbs, there's Oriental medicine practices that can help sperm be stronger, but visualizing that baby and talking to the baby and calling the baby in, I believe, is a powerful practice, and can help people get out of that spinning around, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? What are we doing wrong? Yeah. And of course, making every time they do have sex, if they possibly can, creating a sacred space for it. And a mindset of, it's okay if we don't conceive. We are we're loving each other and we're loving the possibility of this child. I feel I'm not very good at answering this.
I was
I
feeling
mean,
like
go ahead.
you were very much feeling into the powerful energy of what a baby space would like to be felt if he was a baby. And
Yeah,
I thought that was a very beautiful answer.
thank you. I mean, I've just spent months working on a paper on abortion
Right.
because women around the world in so many cultures and for so many years had no choice about whether they were going to conceive, whether they were going to be mothers. And of course, in the United States, we have the Supreme Court ruling that has now made it possible for every state to outlaw abortion. Not every couple is meant to be parents or parents in that way. There are children who desperately need aunties and uncles or surrogate aunties and uncles who live next door. There are so many ways that we can nurture children and be important in a child's life besides having our own children. I guess I just wanted to add that.
Wow. I mean, in our first few classes, we spoke about surrender as a sacred feminine principle, but this is bringing surrender to a whole new experience.
Yeah.
I had moments of it when I was wanting to become pregnant before my second boy. And I remember going, like thinking, okay, I have to surrender to whatever is the will. And I surrendered for a little bit, and then I couldn't anymore. And I'd heard that one of my colleagues had become pregnant with her fourth baby. And I was just like, no, I want it. And like, it's almost like I had to go through that surrender to like say, like, to really also maybe claim the desire and like, not anyway, it's a bit of a personal thing, but like not that surrender is indifference. But I had to go through that. Really, I couldn't pretend to surrender, and then from that I became very clear, and then Sham came. But yeah, that was how it was.
Yeah, I know some midwives have brought women in that condition to a woman's birth to help her by letting her support the woman in labor.
It's the energetic.
Yeah, just the opening that creates of being present in a birth and supporting a woman takes us out of ourselves. And for example, it could be a woman who is a single mother who has no other support.
Did you want to share 2 short stories? And then should we listen to your presentation, Suzanne?
Well, we can see whether we even want to look at the PowerPoint. Yeah, go ahead. Share
Kulina?
those.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, it's dark here and the children are asleep, so no video, but I was thinking of these 2 pastimes from the Puranas, from the Bhagavatam, which are ancient Indian scriptures. There's 2 stories about babies who were in the womb, and the one was great personality, and he was in his mother's womb for 16 years before he came out. And only when his father spoke like the Bhagavatam and the truth of the world to him, then he decided like, okay, now I can come out. And then he went on to do really great things. Another one was
So I thought that was really amazing, you know, when you speak to the baby, we were talking about that. And another one is about a boy who was very saintly, and his father was very demonic. But even though his father was so demonic, he was very saintly and devotional. So he was in his mother's womb. And it happened that he was abducted, kind of, and his mother ended up living in the house of a sage while she was pregnant with him. And the sage knew the nature of the soul inside the mother. So the whole time he was talking to the mother and telling her, teaching her and instructing her. She was like falling asleep, but in the womb, the baby was listening. And when he was born, he just, you know, remembered everything. And he ended up he was very devotional, and he remembered everything he was taught while he was in the womb. So for me, being a follower of the Vedas, it just proves that it's so real, you know.
Yes. Thank you for sharing those stories.
The stories are good. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So we could look at your presentation. We could go through a few pictures. We could keep sharing. Thank you everyone for saying goodbye. And
yeah, I don't think we need the visual presentation. I'm feeling that our energy here is so tender and connected.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then in that spirit, that's nice. And because it also opens up the floor to, if anybody would like to share something personal or ask a question, we can just open up the time all to that now.
This is slightly digressing from what we're talking about, because what we're talking about is really intense, and my question might sound frivolous, but I just want to first put out at the beginning that I'm not homophobic, and I support all gender orientations, but I somehow cannot wrap my mind around transgender pregnancies. I don't know how that works, in the sense that you have a conflict of identity within your own self. And I have seen pictures of transgender people who wanted to be men and are now pregnant and, you know, giving birth with all the physical features of being a man, but, you know, giving birth. So we come from a country where this is not very common. I mean, there are transgender people here, but I haven't really come across a transgender person giving birth or being pregnant. So I want to understand, how does that affect the pregnancy and the birth and the baby who's going to be born? Because we are living in a world where we are talking about chest feeding because, you know, the transgender people giving birth. And therefore, I just want to be open, or, you know, just have the wherewithal to be able to understand how, if at all, I ever come across someone like that, how can we support them? Because, and I think support will only come from understanding. I mean, I can't understand how this would work. If this is something that you'd like to answer.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. What keeps coming to mind for me is both and, rather than either or. I have a hard time too with this. A person can take the hormones to allow them to be to breastfeed, for example, as a male, but they still don't have the brain chemistry of a mother. It's a different thing. So I'm doing my best to hold space for all things being possible. It's a further permutation of years ago, well, of artificially assisted pregnancy, or surrogacy, where a woman is carrying a baby for someone else. But so much of it has to do, I think, with intention, the intention and for example, if a woman is being a surrogate mother because she wants to pay for her college, as opposed to a woman who really just feels nurturing and wants to give to someone else, those are two very different experiences for the baby in the womb. Yeah. It's a brave new world. We're seeing things that we never knew were possible, and we are messing around with nature in a way that we never was intended. And we've been messing around with nature for so many years. I don't know. I know they've done some studies. They're starting to do studies on babies who were born from in vitro fertilizations and the feelings that they have about themselves in comparison to children who were not. I know that research on adopted children adopted at birth, relinquished and then adopted, these children do not feel connected to the earth in the same way. But again, it must have to do with the way in which the parents hold that child and I mean, create space for that child, and possibly the sense that this child comes into the world for a very special purpose, just like the children in indigenous cultures who are neither male nor female and who are given the role of a very sacred role of being a seer in the tribe. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. I have several friends whose sons are transgendering into being a woman, but neither of them is wanting to have a child. That's a whole different thing. Maybe someone else has some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I had a thought. It was like maybe when we can share this wisdom with them, they can already see, because I heard stories like the man was not happy being pregnant because it confronted him with who she was. And so there was the whole time a negative experience during the birth. And I think if they will understand this knowledge, then they might completely perceive this in a different way, so that they maybe appreciate their body and this aspect of their body, that it has a function, and the importance of positive thoughts and being thankful and grateful for having a womb and being able to carry a child. And that might change the whole thing. But that's a matter of conscious and being able to spread this knowledge and this wisdom of perinatal and I don't know the other word, psychology. So actually what you're talking about.
That makes sense. Yeah, so much has to do with the attention we place on something and the intention we have for what we're doing and the consciousness with which we do something, which is not everybody has the same consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked what you said, that there are people in the Native American tribes, I think they call them twin souls, that they have like, okay, they're neither women or men. And I think I have a lot of discussions with my daughters about this because it's their age of discovering and all these things. And I think if we start learning to see you are a human being, and that's who you are. It doesn't matter if you're man or women, or if you have these features, you are a human being and you're being appreciated as a human being, no matter if you feel attracted to men, women, if you feel more feminine or more male. I mean, there are different ways of expressing yourself without going against your nature, just accepting that you are who you are. And yeah, that to me is like really a big thing. Why can't we be who we are? And that can change even.
Yes. Yes. And again, we're talking about the container in those Native American tribes. The group has held these people in a sacred way. It's found a way to incorporate them rather than shun them.
Yeah.
Things are changing so fast right now. And so many people do not have the capacity to accept the fact that things are changing so fast. They didn't feel accepted themselves. And it's interesting that when we talk about cells growing and that they grow in a binary way, and they're either on or off, it's one of the few things that is not on a spectrum, that is not, you know, the spectrum of maleness and femaleness, of gender. I find that fascinating, that nature has that aspect of things on or off. And yet most of life is both and.
Oops, I disappeared for a moment.
That's okay.
I'm back. But I think I didn't miss anything.
No.
Wow.
So, you know, if all that we've done today is get us thinking more deeply, I think it's important. I'm thinking of the poet Rilke, the German poet Rilke, who, writing in letters to a young poet, wrote, "Make of your life a question, and one day into the future, you might find yourself living the answer." Isn't that beautiful? So many of us were raised in cultures that tell us we need to have the answers, but maybe we need to have the questions.
Can you repeat that again, Suzanne? Because that was really beautiful.
Sure. Make of your life a question, and one day into the future, you might find yourself living the answer.
Marianne, you can send it to all of us, maybe on the Telegram group.
Okay, I'll see if I can even find it, but his name is Rainer Maria Rilke, R-A-I-N-E-R, Maria, M-A-R-I-A, Rilke, R-I-L-K-E, and he's a German poet. And this was from his slender book that was called Letters to a Young Poet. And he was a very isolated man, very solitary. the wisdom that he brought through didn't seem to come from any experience in this lifetime, any more than Kahlil Gibran, who in his personal life was not as he was in his poetry. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but they are not of you. Yeah. Difficult, challenging, and worth contemplating. I have really enjoyed being with each of you today, and I wish you well on your journey. I hope that it's a twin journey to the inner world and the outer world. And maybe you, like me, will need to have a healing journey as a piece of your work in the world, your own healing journey, and becoming a detective of your own life and your family and your culture. And my website is birthingthefuture.org. And I also have a number of films that I've done that are on it now as MP4s.
Feels quite reflective for us, but like, you know, like there's a sober reflection, but there's like a nice feeling of like nurturing and hope, and kind of a looking forward to you know, being able to make things different or receive things differently that's happened to us, and but curious about finding out some more.
Yes, we are, as the Chinese said, in a, you know, danger plus opportunity. There's tremendous stuff happening right now. The character for change in Chinese is danger plus opportunity. And we have tremendous opportunity as a species and as individuals right now, particularly if we don't let ourselves fall into the hole of despair. I go there sometimes by trying to pull myself out, and when I can't, then I call someone else, because that's not a good place to live. So maintain your hope, sing, dance, stay together with each other. Recognize how important you are in the whole puzzle, that the piece that you have, the piece that you are playing, is absolutely essential. And I'll try and remember that.
Well, what a lovely honor and experience to just be part of this discussion with you. And I think that it almost has the potential and possibility to become many more discussions, that we just kind of we choose one way and we go deeper and deeper into it. And we think we're doing it to hold space or to serve women, but we end up doing it for our own healing, because there's so much to unpack, and then you think you've unpacked it, and then
for our own healing and for the species, for the world.
Yeah. And then our own healing becomes for other people, because then you benefit from your own healing, and you realize that actually in that healing you have something to share, and then it becomes a beautiful flower again. And that is why we do need to really create these kind of communities and hold on to these communities, because especially in the birthing world, we will get triggered again and again.
Oh,
and
yes.
we'll ask those, those questions will become bigger and smaller and different ways, but
Right.
those causes.
And we'll say things that are foolish. And hopefully we'll notice that we've said that and we can say, wait a minute, that was a really stupid thing to say.
Yeah, like
Can I say
contraction.
something
Who's
again?
contracting nowadays in
Right.
labor?
Yeah,
We're expanding.
exactly. Paradoxical,
Paradoxical, which is what we
both
are.
this and that. Yes.
So
So
thank you
bless
so
you all
much
on your
for
journey.
spending
Yeah.
our time together.